morning, I think.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience as we get everyone in. There's very strict health and safety regulations on how many folks we can get in, so appreciate the patience. It's my pleasure to introduce the marquee panel of the day and of Polkadot at Davos. What will it take to build a better web? With Editor-in-Chief Andy Sewer of Yahoo Finance, in conversation with Dr. Gavin Wood and Frank McCourt. Gentlemen.
Thank you very much. You guys attract quite a crowd here. Looks awesome. Maybe Mr. G. So that's Gavin and that's Frank, in case you guys didn't know. I'm Andy Sewer, and this is going to be a really fascinating conversation, I think, because I'm so intrigued by what these guys are building, and there's a lot to talk about. One thing I should say at the onset is that I think there's a real range of understanding and expertise in this audience, right? So some people are extremely well versed in blockchain, and some people might not know anything about it at all. Some people might be intimately familiar with Mr. Frank McCourt, and some people may have never heard of him. Same with Gavin. So I think we need to be patient with each other, understanding that we're coming from different perspectives and different levels of knowledge here. So I think we could start off by just talking about this really cool announcement that you guys just put out this morning about Project Liberty, and just sort of getting into that. And then I have a million back questions: who these guys are, how they met, what's Polkadot, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get to that. And then we're also going to do some audience questions a little bit later as well. So I don't know which one of you wants to start to talk about Project Liberty. What do you think? Frank, you?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
Want me to just riff, or do you want to? You have a question?
Well, just what are you announcing today? I mean, there's a lot to get to. I mean, it has to do with just. I mean, I'll just say it has to do with social media on Web 3.0, right? And that's just a starting point, perhaps. So why don't you just start by talking about what it is and what inspired you to do it?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And hi, everyone, and thanks for being here. So. Project Liberty is essentially a 3-track project, including a tech track, but it's not a tech project completely, to transform the way the internet works. And there's a movement track, a governance track, and a tech track. And we can dive deep on all of them. But the point is that we believe, and I'll speak for myself, I believe that the way technology is currently architected, it's fundamentally flawed, and it's doing a lot of damage. And what I'm referring to in particular is a surveillance type of usage, right, where our data is extracted and exploited in very, very unhealthy ways, and then also social media, which is doing a lot of damage. So you can actually think of Project Liberty as a project about democracy. And so I elevate one's thinking to that uber level and say, like, we're in trouble right now. If you care about democracy, I care deeply about it. As a 5-generation steward of a family business, I want our business to exist for another 5 generations, or at least another generation. And I'm just really worried, based on what I see in terms of the rapid erosion of democracies, and so we look to say, what could we do as an individual, as an enterprise, as a family? What could we do to contribute? We started something called Unfinished, which was really at the time a portal into asking questions. We crowdsourced questions like, what the heck is going on? What's really concerning you? And what was inescapable, Andy, was the conclusion that technology was really troubling people in terms of how it's being used. And so we kind of went to work to say, okay, is somebody out there doing something with technology and with social media and using Web3 to decentralize the social media in a way that it could be far, far more healthy. And the one project we found that was kind of directionally correct, we thought, was Blue Sky, something that Twitter was doing. But then it turned out that nothing was really happening with that. So I met with Braxton, who runs our labs team, he's here today, and we sat and said, hey, if we were to do something, how would we approach this? And the aha moment was really focusing on the social graph and really saying, what if there was a universal social graph as opposed to billions of atomized graphs, and connect that with Web3 and its possibilities, then something powerful could happen. And just to wrap up here, so we have a tech track. It's a really important one. We've launched, DSMP is open source. It's been gifted to the world. The 1.0 version went out late last summer. But like I say, even though there's an important tech track, it's bigger than a tech project. Unfinished has now become a movement, and we've launched an institute which is focused on Web3 governance, initially in Paris and DC as proxies for Europe and the US. So a lot to unpack there, but think of Project Liberty as really something about democracy that believes that we need to fundamentally transform the way technology is currently designed. And that's where Gavin comes in here.
Right, and not a small endeavor then. Frank, by the way, as maybe you can tell, is an American, is in the real estate business, and also owned a baseball team, Los Angeles Dodgers, among other things. And we'll talk more about his background. But Gavin, I'm sorry, over to you. And so maybe if you could just sort of expound upon your understanding of Project Liberty and then how you're participating and working in it.
Sure, yeah. So, I come to this obviously from the blockchain technology side. When I got into blockchain technology, it was back in late 2013. That's when I really started coding, like putting serious time in. And it was only a few months later that I wrote this article on Web3 that's sort of become, somewhat seminal. And back when I wrote the article, like everything, if you went to a blockchain conference in early 2014, it wasn't called blockchain, it was called Bitcoin, right? It's hard to believe now, everything is, NFTs and Bored Apes and,
DAOs and, right.
It's DeFi, it's smart contracts. These are the sort of terms that we use, and we sort of underpin it with blockchain. But, back then it was really about, building a new world based upon a currency. And the point of Web3 was to say, this technology can do more than that, right? It's not about purely building a currency. And it's not about the things that you can do with a currency either. So, one of the sort of early, if you look at one of the very early white paper of Ethereum, it's not so much an applications platform as saying, here's a way of doing programmable money, right? That's sort of how it was positioned. And Web3 was sort of trying to flip it on its side a little bit and say, well, it's not just about being programmable money, but this can be a general applications platform that can do all sorts of different things, some of which may not have anything to do with money in them at all. And to bring it to Project Liberty, this, I think, is like finally one of those applications that can be built on Web3 that doesn't actually have all that much to do with, the progenitors of Bitcoin, like this concept of a currency. And what's it attempting to do? Well, it's attempting to, in my mind, bring back the credible expectations of users. At the moment, users have an expectation of certain things, privacy being a very notable one, right? Authenticity, another. And those expectations are really oftentimes not being met, either fully or at times not at all. And we have we have the technology to do it better. We have a pretty solid understanding of how to make things private and how to make things authentic. But at the moment, we are, broadly speaking, trusting these very centralized, very, these days, powerful and opaque, profit-driven authorities to do that for us. And that's not a great plan. That's, it's a flawed means of trying to provide these services. And I think, in some sense, Project Liberty is really just attempting to use the right technology to give those expectations back to the world.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point that Gavin's making, that this is one of the first instances where we can think of Web3, blockchain, call it what you will, as something that can be really well beyond what the narrative thus far has been. It seems like the narrative has been co-opted by, these currencies and these coins and some NFTs and so on. Those are just use cases that are, were early adopters of blockchain, but this is really about thinking about blockchain as a fundamental game changer, and it will enable a whole new architecture and a totally transformed internet. And so it's a really significant shift, I think, in how to think about Web3, and combined with a core internet protocol, that would decentralize and create a universal social graph. That combination is incredibly powerful, and what it could enable for society is massive. And so it's a really an inflection point in terms of how to think about and how we can use Web3 and the power of this new technology.
So this could be the sort of a game-changing application use case, if you will, of Web 3.0, of blockchain, and social media would be that vehicle. That is what we're talking about here.
Oh, I think we're talking about thousands of game-changing use cases, right?
Okay.
So that this would enable. So, it would open up a whole landscape of innovation and creativity, and rather than relying on one or two Goliaths and these entities that Gavin referred to, now imagine 1,000 Davids, or 10,000 Davids, or 1,000,000 Davids.
And by the way, I should point out, Gavin is from England, as you may have gathered, and was one of the co-founders of Ethereum, which is no small thing there. So, one of the ways of thinking about this is just one facet is competing against, say, Facebook, right? Or disintermediating or disrupting Facebook. I don't know how you would characterize it. But that's not quite right when you talk about the 1,000 different points of it. Can you explain it, how that works in practical terms? I mean, it's a decentralized form of connecting people together. But what does that really mean, Gavin?
I mean, these old these legacy services are really architected around the idea of like a single giant database, right? And the database sits on potentially a distributed set of servers, but still owned and operated by a single economic entity with their own priorities and interests. And really, when we say 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 Davids, we're talking about trying to avoid everything falling under this same arbitrary point of power, arbitrary decision-making authority. So Twitter has a lot of conversation going on it, right? But there's really only one, I guess, ultimately one person in the Twitter organization, whether it's
Jack or Elon
or someone underneath.
Jack, soon to be Elon, maybe. Right.
They get to decide, where the boundary is for this broad global discourse, and obviously some people will disagree on that boundary point. Others may disagree on other decisions that they make, and it's questionable in my mind whether we can really have a single authority to determine the boundary of global discourse. It may very well be that, like, there are many sort of nation states in the world and many regions within the nation states, and sometimes many cities with their own bylaws within those regions. We may need many different social networks, each with the means of interoperating with each other, but under certain rules, under clear, transparent procedures, processes, and rules, but ultimately that are self-governing.
Right.
I fear that if we try and make a one-size-fits-all social network, we may end up pleasing nobody.
So, is it right for me to focus on this social network facet of Project Liberty?
Sure.
Okay. Is that the biggest part? Is that the most important part? Is that the part that we can wrap our brains around the easiest? Is that the...
I think maybe today.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe,
Okay.
maybe. Think of it more broadly as the beginning of creating a new civic architecture for a digital world.
Okay.
So if you want to elevate a little bit and think of it more broadly, right? We're living in a world with institutions that support our systems, our political and economic systems, that were built in a different world, right? That we're now, they're 70, 75 years old, served us reasonably well, but in a different world, in a different set of circumstances. Now we're in a digital world. We're all connected, massive change. So we're going to have to rethink, right, that institutional framework. Having said that, to buy time to rethink that framework, we need to kind of put out the fire, right? And social media right now is eroding trust at scale. And by the way, democracy, capitalism, call it what you will, they're based on a simple concept called trust. So you destroy the trust, logic would say that it's impossible for the democracy, for instance, to continue. So social media is sort of prioritized as the first kind of challenge and the first thing to address.
Can you give me an example? Say I'm a young woman art student in Lisbon, okay? And I'm fed up with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I like what you're saying, okay? I'm going to cancel all my accounts, and then I'm going to do what? Maybe not today, but tomorrow. What is it going to look like? What's my experience going to be? Who am I connecting with and how?
I think, I guess the product ultimately it will have many different faces, and it will be, although there's the concept of this blockchain decentralized technology backend.
Yes.
There's a protocol, and there's sort of this social network protocol built on top of that, which will utilize this decentralized nature of it all. Ultimately, the things that people interact with, your art student or whatever, is very will be very tailored to their own particular service. So imagine it if we rewind to 2003 or something, it's like Web 2.0 is just coming along.
Right.
Web 2.0 doesn't really look like all that much concretely. The concrete things are things like what became Facebook, what became Twitter, what became
Snap or Pinterest.
Google Docs, right?
Right. Gdocs, anything, right?
And it's not that there's a very obvious singular thing. Rather, it's a bed for innovation to allow the social graph to be used by many different development teams, many different products, but they are all in some sense compatible with each other.
Right.
So let's go back to where Gavin was just in terms of the evolution of 2.0, right? Very few people, I believe, understood what the internet was going to become and what today would look like, right? By the way, now we do. So now we can actually reinvent it and have it work the way it should. But going back to this, your question about social media platforms, it was when these large platforms, or small at the time, understood the value of that data and the accumulation of that data, which what we're referring to as the social graph, each of our social graphs, and kind of vacuuming up that data and then understanding that at scale, when you aggregate the data, there's tremendous value in that data. And then if you apply algorithms to that, right, to optimize for things like time online or whatever, and you realize that, making people angry, outrage is a great way to optimize, right? So if you optimize for outrage, you get outrage, okay? And that this is the connection kind of to the erosion of trust that I'm talking about. But there was no framework when Web 2.0 started, no kind of set of conversations at a societal level that said, what do we want the tech to do and for whom? So the tech is really interesting and it's really powerful. But I think it's important that we also understand that Project Liberty is not a one-track project. It's not just a tech project. The tech needs to be fixed massively. But think of the governance piece and the movement piece as equally important and may turn out to be more challenging than the tech, And we need to talk about those a bit more, because I think one of the fundamental flaws in our set of expectations is that somehow the technologists are going to solve for the societal issues. And I think that's a fundamentally flawed premise. Society needs to solve for the societal issues and tell the technologists what's the framework that they should work within and innovate within. What are the guardrails that they should be between? What are the values and principles that they should be incorporating? What should they be optimizing for? It shouldn't be up to one of these large entities and its bottom line to say, okay, we're going to optimize for what I've just talked about. And we certainly shouldn't say to them, now that you've screwed it up, why don't you decide what's good for technology, and you figure out what's good for moderation, and you figure out what's good for free speech, and you figure out what's good for censorship. These are societal concerns that a governance track needs to be. Social scientists need to understand the power of this technology and be held accountable as much as technologists need to understand the impact on humanity and be held accountable.
All right, so there's a lot to jump off of there. So first of all, the user interface might look exactly the same, maybe. Number one. Number two, one big difference is you're going to control your data. I mean, you're going to own your data. That's a fundamental thing. It's not going to be for sale by any centralized entity. Number three is that, I'll skip to the regulatory governance thing. I'm not sure how that's gonna work. That sounds like it could be really complicated, right? Well, I know what point three was. And what you're creating are sort of the technology tools for people to create these interactions, given A, that it can look like whatever they want, and B, importantly, they're going to keep their own privacy and data, right?
Yep.
And so at some point, you're putting these tools out, SDKs, I don't know what they are, and allowing people to create these networks that are interdependent or not, but fundamentally, they'll get to keep their own data, and they're not going to be beholden to a big corporation.
Yep.
Those kinds of things, right?
Yep.
Yes.
That's a lot. Okay, so I understand how you got there, but Frank, I have to ask you, how did you get there? Because you're like a real estate developer from the United States, this seems like kind of that's not a typical thing for someone in your position to be interested in this stuff.
We got there because we were concerned about, I mentioned 5 generations. So my great-great-grandfather came to America as a 13-year-old from Europe. And, he started a business when he was 50, started building roads when Henry Ford started building cars. We've literally been part of the American project since that time, physically building it. And we've benefited massively from the project. And now we do business around the world, and we've been, very, very fortunate. I'd like to see that continue. I care deeply about democracy, and this is just, kind of hardwired into how I was raised and what I value, and what I believe in. And so when you look around and you see what's happening and you see how quickly we're losing, right, a grip, and democracies everywhere are suffering, we need to do something about it. And I think when I say we, I mean we all need to do something about it. And I think what we need especially is a project, something that's creative, that's positive, that's about the future, that we can do it rather than we're stuck. We're stuck and recycling in the problems. And we know what we're against, right. But I want to know what are we for? What are we going to do? And I do want to make one point, Andy. We didn't just pick Gavin and Polkadot because they're a tremendous piece of technology and the best blockchain and like I say, great technology. Yes, that was obviously a criteria, but it's a shared sense of shared values that's really driving this. It's the fact that here we have technologists, brilliant technologists, that care deeply about these same issues.
Right.
And that alignment of values and understanding that blockchain is a lot more than dodgy coins, right? And get rich quick schemes, right? And this, we hope, is going to shift the focus of what Web3 really is and the power of this technology to actually have a very, very positive impact on society and let us get a grip, get a hold on things moving forward.
Maybe that's a good segue over to you, Gavin, to tell us a little bit about Polkadot and what that does. And you founded that after leaving the Ethereum world. So explain that a little bit for us, please.
All right. Well, Polkadot is, it's many things to begin with. It's obviously it's a piece of technology. It's a community. It's an ecosystem, and in some sense, it's like a broad sort of belief in how things should be done, which is to say, in a multilateral way, against the centralized decision-making, one-size-fits-all kind of mindset. At the face of it, it's a blockchain. So, it sits, the Polkadot network sits there on the internet. It processes blocks, makes sure they're valid. When I say processing blocks, it really means processing transactions. But the key sort of element of the technology is that it allows other blockchains to gather the security from the Polkadot blockchain. So it's a way of multiplying out this level of security without tying in these things that are benefiting from Polkadot security into Polkadot's opinionated transactive sort of mentality. Like maybe Polkadot has some opinions, but we try and shield them as much as we can from these community, as we say, of parachains or of other blockchains that utilize Polkadot, and in doing so are able to communicate between each other. So you can think of it if like traditional sort of blockchains tend to be something like a nation state. They have their own set of rules, they have their own sovereignty, they have like a sort of militaristic force, which we call miners, right? Miners are those that are sort of processing information faster than any other miners of any other chains, any sort of potential attack miners, so that their chain doesn't have any reversion attacks, any transactions that get sort of reverted after they're expected to be finalized. Instead of having this sort of singular nation state mentality where everyone operates under the same rules, we have something more like a federal kind of system, where it's like, there is a sort of single military force that protects the borders, and there are some basic rules of sort of play that everyone sort of has to abide by, but within the sort of overall union nation, there are individual states that can basically set their own means of operating.
And that's the Polkadots.
And those are, the parachains, we call them, but they're the multiplicative, the pluralistic element.
And you guys strike me as kind of an unlikely couple, right? Odd couple. I mean, if you don't mind me saying so, And so how did you meet, and how, you hashed this out in Marseille over the weekend or something like that?
Well, we hashed it out a little bit earlier than Marseille this weekend.
That's the final.
But I think we met at Unfinished Live. It was the first time we met in person. Of course, I knew of Gavin and his accomplishments, and so I was really keen on meeting you and getting to know you a bit. And then we've had the opportunity to meet several times since that and talk this through. In one sense, we're like an unlikely kind of pairing. I think on the other hand, I think it's where great stuff happens is when you have different perspectives on this stuff. Because again, as I say over and over again, the technology needs to be fixed.
Right.
That needs brilliant technologists. Gavin is one of many in the Polkadot ecosystem. Braxton and his team in our ecosystem. These are solid people that really get the technology. But it's unfair and unreasonable to say, well, and while you're at it, solve all of society's issues, save democracy, save capitalism, make everything work really great. That's where non-technologists come into this conversation. This is a much bigger issue that needs to be resolved here than just a tech. I know the tech issue is fascinating and it's interesting, and we need to understand it, right? And as I said earlier, the social scientists need to talk to the computer scientists and vice versa and understand the power of this, because it is ubiquitous in our world right now. And we're talking information technology right now, but we could be talking biotech or fintech or whatever. Yeah. It's taking, it's because it's powerful and it's wonderful. And I want to be clear, the internet is awesome. Everybody being connected is fantastic. I mean, we can actually solve problems at scale here in this world, but not the way it's currently designed. It's fundamentally flawed, needs to be fixed. It needs new operating protocols, and it needs Web3.
So I think one of the points we really connected on was governance, and it was also the underlying concept of Web3. So there were sort of the tech sort of was fun, but it was actually our first conversation down at that cafe in Manhattan. Didn't really focus too much around the technology. We spent most of our time chatting about how these large systems that provided important services to people should be governed. And this is a burning issue in blockchain as much as it's a burning issue anywhere else.
Right.
And it's also one of the sort of key areas where Polkadot's been doing a lot of innovation, and we've been trying a bunch of different things. And I think aside from that, we also talked a little about society and democracy and where things were maybe going a bit wrong.
Right.
And the premise of Web3 is I think very notable here, and I guess it's only gotten worse since 2014 in these terms, and the terms are very simple. It's like what Web3 is about: less trust, more truth. We live increasingly in a society, and you were mentioning it earlier, where people feel increasingly distant from the truth, and then people are starting to realize and recognize that what they do to live out the day-to-day life, to do the day-to-day things that we need to do, requires trust in opaque individuals, opaque organizations that we have to trust to sort of do our bidding for us. Yeah. It's not like we have a choice over. We don't have much of a choice over what bank we trust in order to keep our wealth safe. We don't have much of a choice over which government we trust in order to keep us safe and provide us with the basic services that we need. We don't have much choice over who we trust to, with whom to share our photos between our friends set, or, for many people, how they communicate with the friends that don't live maybe next door to them, and in some cases even when they do.
Right.
And this is, this is problematic, and people are starting to realize it's problematic. And it comes up as much in, when Frank talks, very clearly about, how democracy is finding a lot of this stuff, is becoming increasingly problematic for democratic systems. Well, it's the same as well within the reasons for why I got into blockchain and into Web3 at the beginning.
Right. We're going to take some questions. 1 second. I'll just ask one more quick one, then we'll go to you first, because you were first to raise your hand. Is there a business model here?
Yeah, for sure. There'll need to be, or it won't succeed.
Okay.
Because this all needs to for this to work, we need to unleash massive innovation. And just imagine that everything that we have in Web 2.0, right? The ability to get quick answers or shop quickly or communicate with anybody anywhere in the world. We want those things. These are great things, right? So we're going to have a model in Web3 that is where apps are as polished and all the attributes of Web 2.0 happen, but just in a much healthier way and a much more beneficial way for society. So there'll be a whole ecosystem or a whole, just whatever we can imagine and beyond what we can imagine will be built in this new ecosystem, this new world. And
like
so there'll be massive commercial
If 2.0 is reliant upon advertising that is based on a lack of privacy for an individual, I mean, you could see subscriptions or metering or some sort of an individual would, pay as you go kind of thing potentially. I mean, I
think about it a little differently, Andy. I think about this massive connectivity of humanity, and in an ecosystem that is far more trustworthy, far more reliable, far more people believe in it, as opposed to be suspect of it.
Right.
I think people will actually share more information once they realize that that they control their data and they control the information. I think people will, for instance, share information anonymously for purposes of curing diseses and tracking the next novel coronavirus and to shut it down quickly. This issue of the one area that Gavin and I are still working out language is this idea of less trust, more truth is what Gavin says, and once he explains it, it's clear. I talk about trust as the underpinning of democracy and capitalism. We need more trust too, because there are going to be institutions that are needed in this new digital world. But the point is, we need to start talking about this and working out even the language and how we think about this and so forth. We're just at the beginning.
A first question here. Do you have to wait for the microphone? And then if you could, right here, and if you could identify yourself to a degree that you're comfortable with.
Sure.
I guess, right? I mean,
sure, absolutely.
Sailing away.
My name is Irina Hiver. I'm an attorney based here in Switzerland, and thank you very much for PolkaWorld for organizing this. This is amazing, and Andy, thank you for being a really amazing moderator. That's really excellent. The question I have is as follows. Gavin, back in 2014, you coined the term Web3, and you outlined the vision for the future of the internet. So that was, 8 years ago. And today, we all know, and Frank has mentioned it several times, that in Web 2, we, the people, we are the product. But unfortunately, in Web 3, right now, we, the people, we are the exit liquidity. So what needs to change for Web 3 to change so it's more closer to your vision, what you had envisaged, rather than what is happening now?
I think we need a better. I think the answer still lies within the Web3 motto of less trust, more truth. I think the exit liquidity remark is largely due to people placing too much trust in opaque entities. So ultimately, we have to, as technologists, as product creators, we have to ensure that when people economically move into a product, they have all of the information about that product and service at their fingertips. We need more truth, right? We need less need to trust, because in my mind, a lot of the bad stuff that goes on in the world can be explained by people misplacing trust, right? And exit liquidity being perhaps one of the instances, especially when it's egregious, is where people have misplaced trust.
Yeah, I also think that what we're seeing in the early innings of Web3, it's really kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's Web 2 mentality and focus, quite centralized versions of yet wrapped in a Web 3 clothing, right? And it's really about how to create value quickly in a specific use case. It's really not about the things that Gavin and I are talking about, which is a fundamental sea change in how it all works. I would also add that DSMP you're having a core internet protocol that's not tokenized, that's a piece of public, a part of a common good, is really important as well. There are pieces of the internet that should be public, in my opinion. And then you can build privatized commercial things on that. But right now, we have pieces of the internet that should be public that are private.
Great. Let's see. We've got a lot of people. How about this gentleman? So changing your name of your companies just doesn't make you trustworthy and become Web 3.0.
Well, I would ask these folks.
Just so, you know.
Hi there. So Kurt Hemmicker, MENA Protocol. We're also working on zero-knowledge technology, which helps preserve privacy. But kind of a question for you a bit, Frank, and Gavin coined the term Web 3. I've heard you mention democracy quite a bit, and democracy and capitalization, capitalist society, which kind of what Web 2 grew out of. Are we now on the verge of a democracy 3.0 or capitalism 3.0? How do you see, the enablement of this technology for what you're calling democracy and capitalism?
Yeah, well, I think that every sovereign has two basic systems, right? A political system and an economic system, and they choose what they want. And Western democracies generally have some form of a capitalistic economic system. So I'm oversimplifying it, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. And these systems evolve over time. And the point I made earlier is that we have systems that, and by the way, these systems are supported by institutions, and these institutions work, based on their construct and the set of assumptions and the environment they deal within. We have institutions that have been supporting democracy as we know it and capitalism as we know it. And again, it's different in Europe than the US. And I'm oversimplifying for the sake of simplicity here. But the world has changed completely with the emergence, with this technological revolution. I mean, we're on Web 3 now, right? So we had 1, 2, and we're now at 3. I think the opportunity, let's call it, because we've talked a lot about the problem, is when technology resets itself, it allows us a moment to actually ask the questions, what do we want the technology to do? Do we still want democracy? Do we still want a capitalist system? Okay, if the answer is yes, then how do we want the technology to work to support those systems, right? And that's a conversation that was skipped, right? 2.0 was driven by move fast and break things. Okay, right. Not exactly an inspiring, kind of brightly shining North Star. And it did move fast, and it has breaking things, including democracy, right? So will democracy look different in the future? For sure. I mean, in terms of how people vote and how people do this and that. But I hope it actually gets more people to participate because, there's more trust and truth, and there's more an ability to participate and feel like, as individuals, we're part of the future, right? We're not the product, and we're not being, our data being extracted and exploited. I think there's an awareness now of the fundamental flaw in the construct, and that there really wasn't this idea that you're getting something for free was actually quite misleading. Okay.
Okay, good. That's very fair. How about this woman back here? Yes, in the back with a purple.
Thank you, Andy. I'm a fellow Yahoo, but I was Yahoo.
Oh, wow.
Yahoo
okay, I didn't know that.
Yahoo Web
Then my
1.
condolences.
California, Yahoo Web 1. Sarah Enline, I'm a fellow at Harvard Business School in the Harvard Innovation Lab studying Web 3. One of my advisors wrote the first NFT case at Harvard Business School on Bored Ape Yacht Club, so I'm in the space. And I feel like COVID and a loss of freedom has really created this now rebellious culture. I mean, there was an article in the New York Times called Revenge Travel, and so we're, accelerated technology adoption, et cetera, et cetera. My question is, fast forward 5 to 10 years, what does daily life really look like in Web3? I mean, are we living in the metaverse? Like, I just want to hear your views on what does it look like? What's a consumer's daily life look like?
I don't think it's going to revolve around NFTs. I'm not sure of the level that DeFi is going to play in it either. I think what we're seeing are sort of some early and interesting means of sort of playing with a smart contract platform. I don't know if either of them, I mean, perhaps they'll evolve into a reasonable, useful product at the end of the day. I think NFTs might well do. DeFi, overall, it's going to be, I don't know if I can describe what world will be in 5 years' time, but if I describe the world that I would like to see built in 5 years' time, I want to see more truth, right? That's the whole point of Web3. I want to understand all of the steps that my coffee beans took to get to me, right? I want to know when I read a news article, all of the people all of the evidence that was that fed into this final few paragraphs, right? I don't trust the journalists to get it right. I want to know their sources. I want to know their sources. I want to know who took the video, right? I want to know where the pictures came from. I want to know, if I don't see the pictures, what pictures they saw that made them think this thing and write the article. I want to know the biases, right? This is, if I store my money, I want to know what assets they're being stored in. I want to know what risks are being taken. I want to be able to drill down, yeah? When we come to government, I want to know where my taxes are going, right? I pay enough of them, right? I want to know where they're being spent. I want to know whose paycheck is being funded, yeah? Or which countries are getting aid on the back of it. In short, I want to see a world where the information of the world is transparent, if it doesn't involve the compromising of an individual's privacy, right? So it shouldn't be the case that through Web3 you can steal privacy, but rather the world has a lot of information in it that is free for publication, and it's not being made, it's not getting through to the final consumer, to the final individual who is potentially risking their life on the back of it, or certainly making their life decisions on the back of it. And that's problematic.
Should we do one more question? Yeah, that's great. Sorry.
Sounds like a healthy democracy.
Why don't we? It's hard to pick. You pick.
Me?
Yep.
Oh my God.
Yep. All right. I mean, we may be. I think we're kind of short on time. Yeah.
Thanks again for great. Wahid Chamas. I'm affiliated with a project that's open source for fashion designers. I took your discussion really to heart. I think a lot of us here have the ambition you have to have a really decentralized, permissionless ecosystem. But my question is the daily struggle, because it's one thing to have that vision, but then your employees demand progress quickly, centralized. That artist in Lisbon, like Gaurav said, needs a value proposition. They say they want permissionless, but what content are you bringing? What celebrity are you bringing? They drive you every day to make centralized decisions. And you, Gavin, thank you for your genius. You built a permissionless, decentralized ecosystem. But without your leadership, we wouldn't be here. So my question is, you are taking on, sir, a monstrosity of a project. You're touching social media that affects each one of our businesses every single day. How are you doing it decentralized? I still don't understand. Day to day, how do you manage that struggle between people demanding that you make centralized decisions?
What do you say,
Any
Gavin?
thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think decentralization doesn't mean that you know, everyone is sort of leaderless. It doesn't mean there's no one to sort of no one to help you solve your problems. I do think that, like, leaders, any individual leader only has so much time, right? Elon Musk can only run 3 companies, right? Yeah. You can't expect any individual person to make an infinite amount of decisions. Ultimately, those decisions, that mental leadership has to be divided, right? And thankfully, there are a lot of good people, and oftentimes people make mistakes. Even the best leaders make mistakes, right? So it isn't about like, hey, here's a great leader, let's get them to do all the decisions, and then it will all be no. We're back to sort of centralized thinking, and that's really not what this is about. The whole point of decentralization is to give individuals more credible expectations over the services that they use, right? It's there for a purpose. It's a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. And when we want to, we want to decentralize also the sort of the leadership and the products within this space. We just want to provide a space that has clear expectations, clear rules that are transparent and are reliably enforced, right? And then it's a playground on which all of the ambitious entrepreneurs can create their solutions, their services, and the rest of the world can interact with, on the basis of being able to know, without having to trust them, that these services will work as described.
Okay. Well, there is obviously so much more to talk about, hash out, ask questions about, etc., but we're out of time. And so I thought it was just really awesome and interesting, and I hope you guys did too. So please join me in thanking Dr. Gavin Wood and Frank McCoy.